regarding that particular topic, regarding the theories behind that topic in terms of the literature review that constitutes the literature review. Now, literature review, it comes as the second point there, but during the presentation, and I'll keep mentioning this, literature is something which is a part of every single point that you see under aspects of research. You need to refer to literature or read literature for every single part. When you're coming up with your question, when you're coming up with your methodology, when you're coming up with your tools, etc. Right? So literature is something which is indispensable, and that also comes across when you're writing a paper. So this is then followed by how do you, what are the tools that you use in order to then answer this question which you've just asked. Okay. And that would then lead to, okay, once I know what the tools are, once I know what my question is, and obviously these are interrelated parts. So the whole point of research is that I cannot isolate each of these headings and say that once you're done with one compartment, that it's disconnected from the next. It is very connected. They're all connected, and then they all come together in order to form your final research paper, right? So once that is clear, then you basically have the data at hand. Now, when I say data, this is if you're talking about an empirical paper. If you're talking about a theoretical paper, obviously instead of the data, you would have a more detailed methodology in terms of the constructs, or in terms of the theorems, or in terms of the results, which you will then be using to come up with that theoretical or come up with a new theory to answer your question, right? And then that is then followed by the analysis of the results which you would have come up with, and the policy implications, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to end with as in when I say writing a research paper, I'll discuss one of my first papers that I co-authored and how we went about writing it, right? So we'll discuss that on the slides first, and then I'll show you the paper itself to show you how the different parts were then constructed, right? So what is research? So research, the first and second points that you would now see on your screen are nothing but the definitions of the term research from the Cambridge dictionary as well as the Oxford dictionary, right? So it is nothing but a detailed study of a subject in order to discover new information or reach a new understanding or a conclusion, come up with a conclusion based on the study which you have conducted, okay? And a systematic investigation, or that's basically further making that detailed study more evident in terms of saying that it's a systematic investigation of the materials and sources. So this materials and sources is essentially what comes under your literature review. What do you have at your disposal in order to be able to establish new facts and new conclusions? Because see, you already have people who have established certain findings and facts. What else can you add to literature? So one question which you will always get asked if you pursue a career in research is, what is your contribution to literature, okay, to existing theory, to existing empirics, right? So that is a question which you have to constantly keep asking. What am I trying to answer through this particular piece of research? Okay, so and then it basically is nothing but a structured inquiry which is supposed to create new knowledge which is generally applicable. Generally applicable means, see, if you conduct a study which is very local or which is very unique to say a particular area which you may have investigated, right? So think of it in this way. You're researching, say you're looking at maybe income disparity, okay? And you say that, okay, I go and research or I go and conduct a survey only in the 3 or 4 buildings in my area and wherever you're staying. And based on that, I say, okay, based on the 3 or 4 buildings that I've covered, I can say that all of Mumbai, these are the income disparity levels. You can't make that claim based on those 3 or 4 buildings. And we'll come to that in a minute when we're talking about data, where I will then say that you need to be able to understand the whole point of a sample being representative of the population. Okay, so we'll come to some of these aspects. So generally applicable means whether you can extrapolate your findings, whether you can make certain claims based on the results that you get, and then answer the question in general, right? So critically examining various aspects, and so these are just basically some of the same things said in different ways, in terms of you need to be able to formulate guiding principles which would govern a particular procedure. You need to be able to develop and test new theories that would contribute to the advancement of your field. So if you are writing a theory paper, right, when I say theory paper, it is essentially saying that you are going to be, and we'll see what you mean by a theoretical paper, is when you're not working directly with existing theory and trying to see whether it holds given whatever the theory states, whether it holds or not in reality, right? Whether you can actually build a hypothesis and whether you can test it. That is not what we're saying. We're saying that how do I come up with the theory? Okay, so that's what a theoretical paper is supposed to do. So in that sense, all of this in the last line, if you see, it involves a systematic examination of existing evidence to explain and find answers for what you perceive, with a view to instituting appropriate changes for, what do you think this refers to? This essentially refers to appropriate changes in society, in an economy, depending on what your question is, whether it can be applied and whether it can then make a change. So in terms of thinking of a problem, think of the policy implications. Can I constitute or can I formulate policy based on what I have just told you? And it doesn't, when I say policy, it doesn't just mean for the economy. It depends. Again, all of these questions or all of these statements being made are with respect to the question that you would have asked. Okay. And with respect to research, one of the most important things which I like to mention is the following, that whenever you're conducting research, always make sure that you are looking at the following aspects. One is that you have a strong framework in terms of the theories which you are basing your study against. Okay. The second is always try and ask the question, is my study valid and is it reliable? Now, those are some aspects which, once I've walked you through the different aspects of research, you will then understand what I mean by validity and reliability. Okay. Whether your results are reliable, whether they're robust, are they not representative, are they what you call localized, right? And the final one, which is in my opinion the most important, when you're doing any question that you ask, is my study unbiased and objective? The whole point of being a good researcher is always recognizing that there will, in majority cases, okay, I'm not saying in all, but yes, in majority, 99% of the cases, you will always have two sides to any situation. You will never have just the one side. You will always have one side which says, yes, this XYZ policy is good, and no, this XYZ policy is bad. Or take any question. So, and I'll come to this when I give you a task. There will always be two answers which you can possibly expect to your question. Okay. And that is why it is very important as a researcher to understand that you need to be unbiased, because as a researcher, you are supposed to convey to the person who's going to read your research that you recognize that there are two sides, but based on that, can you, based on the data which you analyze, which you end up analyzing, the theory which you end up proposing, that should not stem from bias. You need to be able to recognize that. So in literature, you will always find that there'll be some economists who'll have who'll follow one school of thought. And you would have done this when you were doing, say, classical economists versus Keynesian economists and so on and so forth, right? So you need to recognize that there are different schools of thought. There are different points of view. And you will always have enough evidence backing both. In some cases, yes, once it is proven that the theory has a major flaw, then yes, you will have people taking the other side. But that is also going to be based on evidence. You will always have an outlier of sorts. Okay. And objectivity. Again, objectivity in terms of saying that I am only trying to convey through my research what my data is telling me. It is not to say that I believe that this policy of whatever, in terms of maybe whatever the Reserve Bank has proposed, a rate cut or not a rate cut, etc. Now they're holding rates, right? So in my opinion, it was wrong, and therefore I know it to be wrong. But based on what? Always have evidence to support your arguments. always realize that you will be asked for evidence every single time as a researcher. You should always back your findings with evidence, okay? And be objective about what you're saying, right? Always recognize and appreciate that there are two sides of any equation, right? So based on that, the different types of research, which I'll come to again, are application based, objective based, and inquiry based. And we'll see this more in detail when I talk about the aspects of research. So in terms of the different aspects of writing a research paper, what you have is you start with a question, or you have something which is, gnawing at you. Sometimes we read an article in a paper, or we see a piece of news on the screen, or on the internet, and it immediately sets us thinking, okay, where do I go with this? Okay, so why is it that someone is saying what they're saying? You have big economists, you have famous researchers and economists taking a stand about something. Why are they taking such a stand? Why are they making such claims? They're not talking in the air. They have evidence to back them up. Okay. And you have to always respect them for their opinions and views. Okay. Every single time, have a question. What is motivating you? Okay. And it's not to say that on day one, you will have the most clear question. It will not appear to you out of thin air. Okay. You will start with a small idea to begin with, which will then be shaped further using your existing theories, or what is on the screen in the second box, your literature review. Once you have the existing theory which shapes the question further, you come up with the tools to try and answer this question. Now, the methodology, it should have been actually a double-sided arrow, so to speak, between literature review data and methodology, because methodology comes not just from the literature review and the question, but it also depends on what data you have at your disposal. Okay, there will be times when you will have data constraints, you will have measurement constraints, etc. Right? And I'll talk about what I meant by measurement constraints. Remind me if I forget. So those are the tools to answer the question. In terms of the data, you have primary, and you would have heard about this, you have primary and secondary data. Primary, which essentially means you go out and you collect the data firsthand. And that's where I was talking about the you intend to apply your results or extrapolate your results to. Okay, and secondary data, which is already collected by either the government or another NGO or another data collection body, and then you are using it, trusting them that yes, they have collected it fairly, and then you can use it depending on your question. Again, what data you use is based on what is your question to start off with, right? Its validity and its utility. So validity, you would have seen, some of you may have heard of the debate in terms of, which has been going on for quite some time, in terms of GDP measurements, right? Whether the GDP, which is now being your GVA, which is now reported, versus the GDP, which used to be reported, the measurements have changed. The way it is calculated has changed. So there are people who are there on both sides of the fence saying that no, it's correct, and no, it's wrong, and the reasons for the same. So again, there are reasons for why they take sides, okay? And then it is up to you as to which side you choose to believe, but you have to be aware of all the reasons of the other side as well. And in terms of utility, like I said, your question drives what data you will then use. This is then followed by the last two parts of your paper, which are nothing but the interpretation of the results which you would get after applying the methodology to the data, right? In order to answer your question. If this were a theoretical paper, instead of the data, so data would still be there. And I'll tell you how. You now come up, so the methodology is supposed to then be a set of rules or theorems that you apply to answer your theoretical question. And then the data, the way the data appears in a theoretical paper is just the following. You apply a test data set to the results which you have just come up with, the theory which you have just formulated. That is called the validation of your theory then. You have to be able to validate any theory that you propose through a data set, right? Because otherwise, how do you make it applicable? How do you make sure that it has utility in the real world? Okay, so that's why data and methodology would then feature in a theoretical paper. And then the final one is policy implications, in terms of saying how can I see or how do I know where this can be implemented or how this can be implemented? Now, one disclaimer about policy implications: the minute I write policy implications, it does not mean that whatever results I get should be implemented, means the policy which I then propose should be implemented by the government, otherwise the economy will fail. No, that is not what I'm saying. Based on the results of the data and the application of the methodology to the data, the results which I get, you can propose certain policies which will then help either the economy, or if you're looking at a village level study, then the village or a city, etc. You are proposing what may work. It is not to say with 100% surety that do this or you will fail. No one can ever say that. Read any paper and no one will ever say that 100% this is right or wrong. You will always have a very what you call objective opinion, which is then supposed to be there in a good research paper. Okay, you will have policy implications which are proposed, but no, they will say that okay, basically this policy could have been implemented this way, or we do propose implementation of this particular policy, right? But no one will say that do this or you're going to fail. No, it doesn't. Research doesn't work that way. Research is not asking you to do that. Okay, it's not asking you to debate and then take sides very firmly. No, take sides, but recognize that there will always be two parties in it. Okay, so then let's start. In terms of writing the paper, what is the question? Okay, the question or the objective is always going to come from a motivation. Like I said, it is formulated from an idea. The questions which you need to ask yourself once you have an idea in your head is the following: is my question relevant? Is it feasible? Especially if you undertake research, is it relevant? Is it feasible? Okay, feasible. And this is something, so some of these questions when you are very important when you start off, when you are actually working under a guide, under a mentor, under another faculty. These are relevant for the following reasons, because to start with, yes, you start doing research as a student, where you may not be fully aware as to whether your study is going to be feasible. Feasible meaning, is it something which is going to take too long, right? Too long in the sense of, is it an in-depth analysis which is required, right? And all research is supposed to be in-depth analysis. It's just the degrees of at which it varies, right? So is my question relevant? Is it feasible? Does it adhere to any timelines? You may have your honors courses, right? Are they a week? Are they a semester long? Are they a year long, etc.? So timelines. You have to be aware of all these when you undertake or you decide to try and answer a question, right? When you come up with the question itself. Is it valid? Is it accountable? Can you basically can the question withstand scrutiny? Can your analysis withstand scrutiny? So for example, if you were to have maybe let's go back to the income disparity, right? So if in terms of withstanding scrutiny, so someone would come up to you and say, you can't make this claim about the city based on the 2 or 3 buildings that you have surveyed. And it is not going to stand up to that particular question or claim, because you have not taken a representative sample. It does not account for all the households in the city, right? You cannot extrapolate it. So can my question, the way the research needs to be then performed is to be able to withstand such scrutiny, okay? And then be held accountable for the results that you get. The one point which you would see there in terms of clear versus confusion, right, is when I say that you come up with a question, it's not very straightforward in terms of, sometimes it is, sometimes you may just have a very crystal clear question saying, does A lead to B? Okay. But many a times you may have a question which is just an idea, and you say, I want to know more about this field and I want to sort of understand. For example, you would have heard of the term protectionism, right? And there was a lot of talk in between saying that is protectionism back? Are we heading towards an era of protectionism? Is it good for the world? Because we were in an era of globalization. Are we moving backwards? Are we, taking a step back? And so on and so forth, right? So it could just be an idea which comes up because you read an article by someone or some economist, etc., right? Your question then should not be based on what you want to find. It should not come, and this is also a little bit in terms of the objectivity, as I was mentioning earlier. It should not stem from the fact that I want to prove that protectionism is bad, and therefore my question will focus on A, B, and C. That should not be the result. That should never be the result of you looking for a question. Never say, I know this is what I want to find or I intend to find, and therefore I will look at questions 1, 2, and 3. Okay. It should never be that way. And I'll make a similar claim when we're talking about methodology as well. So you could have an idea. It is, you may not have a very clear question to start with. And when you don't have a clear question to start with, you base your, or you try and construct a question based on literature, based on existing theories, based on reading other people's work in that field, and then come up with a question. That's how literature review would feature here. Okay. So you can always use existing literature to also come up with a question. Fine. And then the last part of the slide which you have is nothing but any question that you want answered, or any hypothesis that you want to test, whether it holds or not in your context or in your country's context or in the banking context or in the developmental context, etc., whether it can become a research problem or a research topic, and whether it's feasible, right? And like the last note which is there is just what I mentioned right now in terms of the clear versus the confusion. That part where it says not all questions may have easy transformations into feasible research problems, right? Some may prove difficult to study. Like I said, there are varying degrees of in-depth analysis. Okay, so not all questions would have an easy answer. Okay, so formulating a research problem would then be either of these types, whether it's applications based, right? Whether, so in that you also have your pure research. And like I said, if you want to come up with a theory to answer a particular problem, then you also have to be able to show that, validate the theory which you have formulated with theorems which hold true, and then theorems, and therefore theorems, existing theorems, and then come up with your own theorems if it's a pure research paper, and then make sure that you have data to back the theory, data which proves that this theory works, okay, or holds. Applied research, which is essentially you think of a problem or a research question, and then based on existing evidence in literature, based on existing analysis which you already have about this particular topic, you come up with findings which may not have, or one, findings which may not have been established earlier. Two, add to literature in terms of this has not been what you call analyzed before in the Indian context, and therefore we are analyzing it in order to contribute to literature in that sense. Okay. The second one is objectives based in terms of descriptive and an exploratory analysis. Now, this used to be economic analysis when the theories were being written. You read works of Friedman, you read works of Keynes, you don't have any math. Okay, math is something which became a language to deal with economics sometime in the 70s, right? So descriptive is when theories were at the time proposed in that manner, right? In some of your courses which you would have taken under arts, you would have papers which would be, even in English literature, you would have papers which would be entirely descriptive, right? So that's the type of research. So this figure over here is supposed to encompass all the different strands, right? And then the final one is, so correlational or explanatory is also the quantitative applied research that you have based on the question at hand. And inquiry based again. So basically, depending on the question, you can put them into either of these buckets. Okay. So now I want you guys to do a simple thing. You have your pen and paper. Just write down an idea or a question which you would like to examine. It is fine. So the second point about confusion versus clarity, it is perfectly fine to not have a well, fleshed out question right now. Just an idea that you would like to know more about, ask more questions about, read more about, and find out more about what is done in terms of research to get a better understanding in that area. It could be in development economics, it could be in monetary economics, it could be in banking, it could be in anything that you want, right? Or if for those of you who may be from younger classes, your micro, macroeconomics, etc., right? So anything that you want to know more about, just take 2 minutes, write that down. Okay, so because I wouldn't know how long it would take, you can continue writing it, it's fine. And also write down the nature of the problem that you want to analyze. So I'm just going to go to the next slide and we'll start with the literature review, which, like I said, it's an important step which also encompasses the other parts of the paper in terms of looking for the question, in terms of, so where does it fit in research writing? As a section, and this is what you would see in most journals of repute, it would not appear as a section in some, but in some it would very clearly, you would have very clearly demarcated introduction, literature review, methodology, data, so on. In some papers, you would have the literature review just freely flowing from your introduction to the methodology, right? What is literature review? Literature review, I'm going to talk about it in two ways. The first is existing theory. Make sure that whatever question you want to answer, you always know or have read about existing theories in that field, especially all the seminal work. Okay, when I say seminal, all the people who actually came up with those theories, make sure you would have read those in order to get a better understanding about the area. It is always good to go back to the source. You would have heard people saying that. So this in terms of a research paper means that you go and read. So if you're reading something in monetary economics, etc., go back, read Milton Friedman, go back, read. So depending on what your question is, by the way, you're reading something about inequality, right? Go and read Amartya Sen. You're reading something about human development, read Sen, read the others, etc., right? So read the people who actually wrote the theories. Okay, disclaimer, you may not understand their reading in the first go. I didn't when I read them for the first time, and I said, oh my god, I don't understand this, how am I going to go ahead? It's fine, it's perfectly fine to do that. You may understand maybe what, 40-50% the first time. Read it again, read people who may have cited their work. The other thing is, the next step, before you read them again and feel that okay, I don't understand any part of it, read other people who would have been of known, renowned economists, who would have then cited the works of these people, because they would have some understanding and they would have simplified it also in their papers. And then come back to your paper, okay, the original one. Try and give it one more reading, you'll understand more. Okay, don't get bogged down by papers which you don't understand. And this is exactly why you initially don't work all by yourself as independent researchers. You have your faculty for this exact purpose. You talk to them, you tell them what you understood, not understood. They're supposed to be your guides for a reason, your mentors for a reason, right? So that's exactly why you have your professors, right? So do that. But don't get bogged down saying that, okay, this is sounding too difficult, it's a dead end. No, see how you can always take it as a challenge and try and get better at it. Okay, so that's the theory of it. Once you've understood the theory which surrounds your question, then look at, if it's an empirical paper, then look at empirical evidence with regard to this theory, with regard to the question which you are asking. Okay, ideally two things will happen. You will either end up finding a paper which has already answered your question, which can be unfortunate if that happens, but that can also happen. The other thing is, in the publishing world, whoever publishes first, even if you've done all the research and you're about to hit publish, you can't if it's already published. So but it's not about speed. So never go by speed in research. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so especially if you want in-depth analysis, your speed comes with time, over time. Experts can write and publish faster in many cases. So that is there. So that's your literature review in terms of theory and then the empirics of it, right? And this also helps establish your contribution to literature. Like I said, if you find someone who's already published in your field to a fair extent, see how you can then contribute to literature which is not already covered, an aspect which has not already been answered, a question which has not already been answered. You can try and figure out which of the aspects has not been answered. Okay, you can always look for a question after you find, okay, if this has been done, what have they not seen, what is a drawback? And ideally, when you read the works, you will always find that any author will always quote what they have not done, every paper. And that's another thing which I'll talk about when we're concluding. Okay, and literature review in terms of post analysis, you will have to talk, when you're talking about the analysis, you need to talk about which studies it conforms to or is in accordance with versus which it isn't, right? So, okay, now quickly, some of you I know are senior students. See if you can write down some of the theories that surround your question, which you've written down. Okay, it could be books, it could be papers, whatever you know. It could be authors that you've heard of but not read. It is fine, as long as you have some theories, or it could be an equation that you've read, or it could be some sort of I'm not sure whether you've done some of the development economics in terms of, say, Kuznets curve and inequality, etc. But anything which you may have identified in terms of theory and said that, okay, this is what I want to, this would be the theory which would help answer my question. Okay, again, you don't need to have the answer laid out for you. Okay, it could be very well that you need to look for the answer, you need to research it, you need to do a Google search, etc. Whatever, however you decide to start looking for, read more of your books and papers, and then you can find that. Okay, in terms of if it's an empirical question which you have come up with in the first task which I set for you, think about, have you come across studies, have you seen any articles which were talking about something which led you to ask a question? Think about those articles. Those articles will ideally always cite either the writer's own work or some other study which they would have referred to, which is always a good starting point, because you started your question because you read something, right? So see the studies based on that. Look at literature, start looking at literature from that. Okay, so and then looking at the theories which were used to construct that particular, or come to that particular conclusion which you came across. Okay, take about a few seconds to do that, and then we'll go ahead. Just one or two. It doesn't have to be a whole list. It doesn't have to be 10 articles or something. Just one or two. Right? Okay. So after that, coming to the methodology. Now, methodology and data work hand in hand, like I said. And as you can see, I'm veering constantly towards an empirical paper. To start with, it's good to start with an empirical paper, but it, again, another disclaimer, all that I'm telling you is not set in stone. Conducting research is something which is very fluid in terms of each person coming up with their own way of doing it. So just because I'm saying it doesn't mean that this is the only way that you do it. Okay. So methodology is nothing but the tools which you would use to answer the research question which you would have posed. Right? And again, like I said, it depends on the research question. Now, a big thing, and I've not put it in bold over here, but I have put it in caps, is the following. Always make sure that your methodology is, you come up with the methodology based on the research question and not the other way around. Never say that I want to apply this particular methodology, therefore my question will be this. That is absolutely wrong anytime. Okay, that is set in stone. Don't make your methodology drive what your question is going to be. Okay, it should always be, you start with a question, then you figure out the tools to analyze that particular question. Unless the only time when that is actually valid is if you are writing a paper on econometric methodology. If you are writing an econometric methodology paper in terms of what are the tools, or if you're deriving a tool in your paper, then obviously the methodology forms the basis of your question itself. Okay, but in all other purposes, all other papers, theoretical, empirical, what have you will always go from your question to your methodology. Even in the case of the econometric methodology, you will come to the econometric methodology part based on what tool you are proposing, what tool do you want to devise, what test do you want to formulate. Okay, it never works the other way. You always go from the question to the methodology. Clear? Right. So the question and the nature of the answer would determine what tool you want. Why nature of the answer? Nature of the answer because you want your methodology to be able to produce an answer which would help answer your question. And therefore, the nature of the answer which your methodology throws out is important. If the tool which you are using does not give you the answer which it gives you an answer, but that answer has nothing to do with the question you started off with, then that doesn't work. Okay, so that is how you can have. And when I say, so there's one point on your screen which you see, which is called multiple methodologies. Multiple methodologies means that what if you come across two different methodologies which both give you answers which can help answer your question? Then what do? So ideally, again, this is my take on it. It doesn't have to be your take in future, but what you do is you try both the methodologies out because they're competing methodologies. Try and see what answers you get. Are you getting answers which are similar? Are they drastically different? Why are they drastically different if they are competing methodologies? Try and then, because see, what happens is when you start with one question, you realize that you also come up with smaller questions as you are conducting research. This is one of those moments, right, where you've come across two methodologies. You are one, you can, there's one case in which you can be absolutely sure that I don't want to use methodology 2 because I know it has a severe drawback with respect to methodology 1. Okay, and then you're sorted. You can just say that that methodology has a drawback and therefore I'm going with 1. Alternatively, if both don't have or have similar drawbacks or similar issues or similar results, you can implement both and then take a call based on the results that you get, the answer which you were supposed to look at in terms of does it answer my question. Okay, the one thing which you have to be absolutely sure about is understanding the methodology. You need to be able to understand it clearly in order to be able to apply it. Now, many a times what may happen is you may say that what you call the methodology, okay, I've never done this before. It's too theoretical, or it's too mathematical, or it's too data intensive, or I don't know how to code. I've heard it from even tech students. I don't know how to code. Now, if you face such obstacles, the one thing you need to realize is the whole point of research is you're learning something new. So don't take a step back and say, okay, I don't know how to do this. This seems easier. Let's go ahead with this. Don't do that. Try and learn and take up the new issue that you have, the new methodology that you're facing. Okay, do that and then try and keep going ahead. Fine. Because especially if you found the one methodology, it's better if you actually try and learn that rather than go back and say, no, I'll change my question because the methodology is too complicated. Don't do that. That's not what research is. Okay, so that's the part of methodology. And like I said, always know the pros and cons of whatever you're implementing. There are always two sides of it, and there are cons to methodologies as well. Okay, everything is not perfect. Okay, so that's methodology. Coming to data, based on the type of, again, based on your question, you can have different types of data. You could have qualitative data, quantitative data. In economics, what would you classify as qualitative data? Think about it. We'll talk about it in the Q&A as well. Quantitative data is fairly obvious to most of you in terms of what data is collected, how can you quantify it, categorize it, etc. Right? The distinction is basically due to the restrictions which are imposed on the flexibility, structure, etc., that you would have to answer your research question. Okay. So now, based on the data source and the way data is collected, you can have either primary data or secondary data. And as I've already mentioned, your primary data would be the ones that you would collect through surveys, interviews, where you would actually create a sample survey and structure it. The one point which you have over there on your screen is bias in sample survey. Now, what do you mean by a bias in sample survey? I've already told you why you, as a researcher, should be unbiased at all points in time, or your study needs to be unbiased, right? Bias in a sample survey can arise in different ways, and this uh, you can stop me if you've already done this before, where you may end up unconsciously or consciously end up influencing an answer if your question is structured in a certain manner, or if you pose the question in a certain manner, and things like that. So when you're looking at if you ever do research in terms of sampling design and how to construct a sample survey, bias is one of the things which you will constantly have to be aware of and constantly make sure that you are not biasing this data in any way, right? Nature of the questions, you could have three different types. You could have a descriptive question. You could ask the person who's answering to write the answer, or have someone write the answer for them. It could be a narrative. It could be an experience which you could ask them to share. It could be quantitative in terms of, okay, how old are you? The simplest question, how old are you? Okay. The most complicated question, and some of you, if you've done the research, would know, is asking someone's income. And income is something which people don't tend to reveal truthfully in many cases. So because of which, even when you look at the national sample survey, you have an indicator of the income, but you don't always have the income levels. So the indicator is essentially what they call the monthly per capita expenditure, right? So that is supposed to, based on your expenditure, you take that as the measure of income. Okay, because people can reveal how much they spend on food and clothing, etc., but they would not probably want to reveal their actual incomes. Okay, so these are some of the issues which you will come across if you do a primary survey, and you will need to know in case you have sampling design, etc. Secondary data, slightly simpler in terms of it being collected by someone and tabulated neatly, and you have it right in front of you. So then, but then it has other issues, like I said, measurement issues, if any, construction issues, data construction issues, if any. What methodology did they use to come up with an index, and things like that, right? So different issues across both the sources of data. So again, quickly, with the paper that you've already written on, what data would you need to answer your question? If it's empirical, by the way, I'm assuming some of you would have empirical, some of you may have a theoretical question. So what sort of data would you need if it's empirical to answer your question, and if it's a theoretical question, then what data would you use to validate your theoretical question? Okay. Make sure that the sources you have are robust, are accurate, are suitable to answer your question, and so on. I think I have about 10, 15 minutes left. Roughly, yes. Okay. Again, for those of you who may not have dealt with data, it's perfectly fine to not know what data source you would use. It's perfectly fine. You could come up with a question and then start looking for data sources as well. It is perfectly normal to do that also. Okay. So that's in terms of the data at hand. Coming to the analysis of the results, your results, see, it's one thing once you've applied the methodology to the data, you would have the obvious answers, so to speak. So if you've basically estimated an equation, you would have the obvious estimates and what they would mean. But analysis of the results is one step further, especially when you're talking about economic analysis. You need to be able to further interpret what these results are telling you. You need to be able to connect it to a broader narrative for your paper to have more what you call value, so to speak. and to have more connectivity in terms of policy, in terms of how well you have understood the situation. So for example, if you were talking about a development economics question, it's one thing to sort of run the model on the data and say, yes, I got the result which I was looking for to answer my question, and that's it, end of paper. It doesn't work that way. Try and see whether you can ask further, or you can ask more of the data, so to speak. Have you, whatever results you have, is there something more that I can infer? Is there something more in terms of the underlying reason? So when you have results in line with theory, it is fine. Well behaved data, I have everything in line with theory. What does it indicate? It indicates that the theories which have been mentioned so far in literature, those are continuing to hold, right? Why are they continuing to hold? Is it a drawback? So for example, why would, and we'll see this when I discuss the paper, for example, people in rural India still use what is called unclean fuel. Unclean meaning your, firewood and chips, your dung cakes, etc., which is not good, right? So because it's harmful for the person who uses it, especially for cooking. Women inhale all the smoke. It's bad for the health of the women and children in the family who predominantly spend more time at home. And as well, so then that, suppose that's the question, and we'll see that. Suppose that's the finding. Yes, rural India uses more of that. I can't just stop at that. It's not adding any value. My results need to be able to add value to existing literature. Everyone knows this. Everyone already has the figures. What more can I add based on the results which I've gotten? Now, again, when I say what more can I add, it also comes from your question to start with. But if suppose you've missed out on some sub question, sub part of the question, right? But your results, looking at your results, you suddenly feel, oh, okay, I had not thought about this, but it is showing up as an anomaly. Or it is showing up and you're like, oh, I have not asked this question. It is in line with theory, and therefore it is an inference I can make about this data. Okay, look beyond the results and try and connect it to the reasons, especially if you're working in any of the fields. Okay, it could be macro, it could be micro, it could be development, etc. Try and connect it to the reasons for why you are getting any particular result. Okay, that will add more value to your paper if you interpret them to in a meaningful manner, basically. Okay, so that's the last point in terms of make as much use of the question and the associated background and theory. Okay, the last part is the policy implications. Now, you would say, okay, why does it have to have a policy implication? It's not that it has to have a policy implication, but what tends to happen is in order to make sure that you have done a relevant or have answered a relevant question, you need to be able to see how will this better the economy, better the if it's in macro, then economy, better the economy, even in development. If it's a development question, how is it bettering the economy? How is it, if it's from the finance point or the banking system, how is it bettering the current financial situation or the financial sector? Does a new product need to be introduced in the financial markets? So on and so forth, right? So those are some of the ways in which you bring about, how do you connect your results to policy, probable policy implications. Okay, on day one, the policy that you propose as a result may not get any, you may feel, okay, even if I say this, who's listening? It's not about who's listening, it's about whether you can think beyond just the results which your methodology threw out. Okay, so it's about you connecting, making that connection between your factual results with reality, and saying, going forward, if we go in this direction, we're in a better world. Okay, if we look at this particular aspect more closely, everyone will be better off. Okay, again, policy implications, it shouldn't be the fact that your policy implications decide what you have as a research question. Don't do that. Similar to methodology, it doesn't work the other way around. Go from the question to the implications. Okay, yes, you may have an existing policy. If you're looking at efficacy of a policy, then yes, you will have to start with policy in the question, not with what you want as the answer. You don't start with, I know this policy is that, therefore my question is going to be, is this policy good? No, you're biasing yourself. Okay. uh, your policy implication is supposed to give you a holistic view of the subject and its implications, which would then be written out in your paper. It doesn't have to be a whole 2 pages or anything. It could just be as small as 2 lines or a single line if you want, right? But provide them cautiously. The reason I'm saying cautiously is, if it is something, as in, it's not in terms of a comparison, like I said. So the reason why I say cautiously is the following. Suppose you come up with a policy implication which says that the economy should focus more on, say, providing a subsidy, suppose. Okay. Suppose that is the policy implication which comes up as a result of your study. You can't make the claim that therefore the alternative, which is not providing a subsidy, is completely wrong. Why can I not make this claim? Why can I not say that if I am saying that this policy should be pursued based on the results, why can I not say that policy B should not be pursued? The reason why I can not say that is because I've not undertaken research to see whether that should not be taken up. Okay. I have not conducted research to see why that policy may have been bad. And therefore be cautious when you are writing. So writing is everything. You can't make claims which you have not verified, which you have not found evidence for. You can only make policy implications or claims based on your results and your interpretation. You cannot what you call completely banish the other policies just because you found something in favor of one policy. Okay. So that's why cautiously, and never take extreme. Therefore the next following thing would be, don't take an extreme. Okay, so that's the example which you have over there in terms of, suppose the results indicate that the policy would help improve the productivity of a region, right? Only if you've compared this in terms of policy efficacy, which I've just mentioned, or effectiveness with respect to the existing policy, can you make the comparison and say that this one was better than that. Till you don't do that, you can't make that claim. Okay. So coming to, so that actually ends the part which I wanted to convey. And what I'll now do is I'll just take 5 minutes of your time to walk you through a paper. It was my first paper which I published when I was working as a teaching assistant with Professor Vijayalakshmi Pandey. Okay, so the paper, I've given you the title of it, and I'll also show you the PDF of it, don't worry. Was basically about comprehending, and the title is quite long enough, so it conveys that. Comprehending the household cooking energy choice in rural India. The parts which I've not talked about the paper are the abstract, and so the policy implications were supposed to be in the conclusion. So the abstract and conclusion is what I've not talked about. The abstract is supposed to basically be a short paragraph about the entire paper. Ideally, never write an abstract to start. Okay, the abstract needs to be written at the end. I'll give you a few tips about how if I'm writing a paper, which areas I would end up writing first and which I'd end up writing last. Okay. And then the conclusion again is supposed to summarize all the findings right from your introduction to the end. Where does the literature review feature there? Where you're talking about which results are in accordance with which existing theories and existing empirical evidences and which are not. And if they are not, why? What do you think are the probable reasons why they are not in accordance with theory? Okay, so all that comes in the conclusion. So this was a paper which we wrote in 2011, which was on comprehending the household cooking energy choice, which is, so they call fuel energy in research as in technical terms. So you have cooking energy choice in rural India. So this, as you can see from the title itself, the question was that in rural Indian households, what socio-economic factors determine which fuel the household would end up using for cooking. Now, why is this a relevant question? Why is this a valid question or a feasible question? What we did was we were reading through, and obviously this was more about also the faculty who also had the question, because I was just an assistant at the time. But yes, even when you're co-authoring, you both of you have to read all the questions at hand, right? So and all the literature at hand. So basically, the question was the following: that if I'm supposed to look at the socio-economic factors which would determine which fuel gets used, one, why is it important? Motivation for any research study is very important. What led you to come up with that question to start with, right? So what led us to that question was the following. We had about 76 or 77% of the rural population or the rural households that were using, and this is across India, that were using firewood and chips, dung cakes, coke, coal, etc. for cooking. And that's a huge percentage. Now, this is as of 2009. Okay. So when we did this study, we said that, okay, that's a very high proportion. Now, there were existing studies based on this particular question, which said that there is such a high, what you call, percentage of people using this. But those were looking at income disparity. Those were looking at whether the families were rich, poor, etc. What we decided to then look at was take it one step further. Look at education and gender. Why education and why gender? Because the question which was asked was that if the women in the household are educated, then would it mean that the households are more or less likely to use this unclean fuel? Ideally, what would you expect? Now, when I say what you expect, it is different from what you want. I'm not saying I want the result to show this. I'm saying I would expect that if the household is educated, then they would be more likely to use LPG or other cleaner alternatives, right? But can I say that I want the data to show that? No. My data can very well show me the exact opposite, right? And we'll come to that in a minute. So those were the two, we wanted to focus on those aspects. And again, one of the motivations, as you can see on the screen, if you looked at only the states of Jharkhand, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, and UP, which were the lesser developed states, according to that particular survey for that year, for those 4 years, it actually ended up saying that 97% of the households were actually using biomass fuels. The other motivation was the Millennium Development Goals had also been announced. And those were also looking at cutting down, these unclean alternatives. And I'll show you that when I show you the paper. So you need to come up with, so this can also form theory. So when I say theory, it need not be just, so where does theory come in over here? Theory comes in over here because theory tells us that according to the traditional view that we have about what energy is used, what influences the decisions in a household, especially a rural household, what should we be considering? What policies should we be, what you call, propagating in order to make sure that all the households move towards cleaner alternatives, right? Mitali, let me know if I'm overshooting, okay? Yeah. So basically, in terms of what you have over here on the screen, in terms of the 97%, this is the finding from the National Sample Survey at the time, okay? So from the 61st round. Okay, so then that provided the motivation and led us to come up with this question. Now then, and then what we constructed as a result, and this is what we saw as well, what we wanted to see was, like I said, the women in the household, right? Sorry. So the education of a working age female, and working age, you'll be surprised, we ended up having to take, and this is also what is used in theory. Okay, so working age female, especially in rural India, is considered to be from the ages of 10 to 50, as low as 10. Okay, so we're not considering 18 as adult or whatever. Traditionally, you have girls starting working in rural households from the age of 10, and it is established that you would, if you're looking at working age, you're looking at 10 to 50. Okay, so and the other variable which we also wanted to see was the average education level. That if you had people who were more educated, so had completed at least middle school or high school or even higher, and versus those which did not have any formal education whatsoever. Okay, so I'll talk about those variables also. Other variables which we've already come across in existing theories and in existing literature in the Indian context were the ones which you have here, where income was an indicator, household size was an indicator, if they had more land, that was an indicator, caste was an indicator. The one which we had expected, so the BPL ration card over here refers to the below poverty line households which exist, who have that type of a ration card. Now, traditionally, you would, one second, traditionally what you would expect is that if the ration card is of a certain type, again, this is based on what you've read in other studies which may have looked at other questions. So not all the studies that we read were talking about determining the cooking fuel choice. The studies were talking about different questions which they'd answered, but they had these socioeconomic factors which they were using, etc. Right? The theoretical foundations, like I said, based on existing studies which you had, and the methodology which we had. Now, methodology, it's okay if you don't understand the model which has been used to analyze this data, the multinomial logic model, because there were multiple choices which the households had to choose from in terms of the what you call cooking fuel, right? And then how do you interpret those? So the second and third are essentially referring to that. In terms of the, oh, okay, one second. I'll just start wrapping up. I think right, okay, fine. So in terms of, just give me 2 minutes and I'll just wrap this up. What I'll do is I'll just directly go to the paper so that you can actually see that. Right. So, okay. Is the paper visible? Yeah. So basically, yeah. How long do I have? Just 2 minutes at least?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So in terms of the paper, the abstract I'll show you at the end. So the introduction was essentially talking about, it starts with the simplest of things. We're talking about the cooking fuel choice. It starts with what does the energy refer to, okay, and why it is essential to life. Now, then you go ahead and talk about why are we even talking about this? The direct effects of using unclean fuels, the environmental effects of using unclean fuels, and then the literature associated with that.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
The paper is not visible.
Oh, sorry. One second. Yeah, is it visible now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So, sorry about that. Yeah. So basically, what you do have is the following. You have the direct effects and the environmental effects, which also play a part over here. And then you go ahead and have, so you basically, it's like writing a story. You need to be able to formulate a story in order to answer that question. It can't just be, this is my question and this is the answer. That's not the paper. Your paper needs to be able to tell a story, right? So you come up with those direct effects. The MDG goal, which I talked about, it was aimed at ensuring environmental sustainability as one of its indicators, which, so environmental sustainability was then connected to our question. Because of the environmental impact that you would have as a result of 67% houses or 97% in the cases of those states using this unclean fuel, right, for cooking. And cooking obviously is a major part of the day in terms of, and then if it's in some of the states where you have very harsh winters, then imagine using the same for even heat, providing heat during the nights, etc. So given all of that, what we did was we connected it in terms of theory to the Millennium Development Goal. Okay, saying that we know that the Millennium Development Goal talks about environmental sustainability, which therefore is also formulating that theory. Okay, that if I can answer what are the socioeconomic factors which impact this, can I then think of different ways in which I can influence a household to move towards a cleaner option. Okay, so these are some of the things in terms of, then you go through the different what you call surveys which have been conducted. We worked with the 61st, sorry, 64th, which was 2007-8 data. Okay, and we did have data for the 61st as well, but we ended up not using it eventually. So that is a call which you take over time in terms of when you're conducting the research, right? So you come up with the entire story. So this entire introduction is your motivation to why you are doing this at all. Okay. Then you come up with, so always have one paragraph of what you are going to contribute to literature. Okay. What in one sentence you should always be able to write, what is the aim of the study? How is it going to contribute to literature? If you're reading papers from really good journals, you would always come across at least one line which says, this is the contribution to literature, or this is something which has not been done before and we are going to do that. Okay. So the material and method, so this actually, the structure was also driven by the journal requirements, because the journal wanted us to have the data and the methodology all in one, right? So we had the data and then the methodology, what is used. So this is the data. Sorry, 61st one, I was right. Yeah, the 64th one had just come. I think it came after we had already sent it. It came a year after we got the results, the review back. Okay, so yeah, the household level data, the survey in terms of what it covered, how many households, etc. In the methodology, like I said, you also need to be aware of what are the alternate methodologies, if any, and what are the drawbacks, if any. Okay, and what results it would give you in order for you to be able to answer the question. Okay, this is essentially the deliverables which were included in the model. So like I said, the monthly per capita expenditure, the household size, which is the number of members, the average household education, and the educated females. These were basically, this was a number, right? The number of literate or higher educated females. But the average household education was an index which we created, saying that, you give different weights to the different types of education and divided by the number of people in the household, which would then determine the household fuel choice, if it does. And this is expected sign, what you expect data to tell you. Okay, doesn't mean you want it to tell you that. You could very well have different results, and the ration card one is the one I'm going to highlight because we did end up getting different results for it. So what we had expected was that if you didn't have a BPL ration card, that you would end up using a cleaner fuel. However, that was not the case. Okay, so I'm going to quickly go to the results and say that what we did find was, sorry, this is just the correlation table, but the results of the model were essentially that as in it was all in accordance with theory, except for the ration card. So we ended up getting a negative coefficient here, which meant that if you were a BPL household, in terms of the ration card type, that you would actually end up, it would not have any bearing, or it would actually promote the use of, it would not promote the use of a cleaner household. Now, why would that be the case? It's highlighted here that the only variable which did not work with theory was the BPL ration card type. Now, the availability of affordable kerosene was the probable reason, okay? In terms of how, because now again, probable reason because it's not tested as to whether that is the reason. We've not gone to the ground to figure out why that is the case, okay? So it indicates the presence of the cards implies a lower probability of the households using a clean fuel. Why had we expected a positive sign here? Because the below poverty line households are also given fuel, right? Because at lower rates, etc. Now, however, this was analyzed in terms of the percentage of households in which this happened. Okay, they ended up using the kerosene for cooking, but that was only 0.72% of the households, of all the households that had the card. Okay, and some of them actually used the open market for the kerosene, right? And this is across all the rural households in India. Okay, so the reason could be attributed to the lack of accessibility of those ration shops from which they're supposed to get the cleaner fuel. Okay, so that was the only one which was not in line with theory. All the other variables ended up being what we had expected of them, especially education. So education and the education of the women in the family. So the conclusion and what you have here is essentially the policy implication right there. Okay, so that's the paper over here. One second, let me just quickly go back to the presentation and I will show you the last slide and we will then stop. Yeah. Sorry, it's gone slightly longer than I had wanted it to, but I'll just quickly wrap up. So the last one is just some pointers, as I said, in terms of writing it, that I would write the introduction and the abstract towards the end when I started writing a paper. The order of research that you conduct many a times depends on what you are researching. It depends on whether you're working with someone who prefers a different approach. And like I said, what I told you is not set in stone. You could have a different approach altogether and it still works. But yes, have passion, have perseverance, have patience, because research requires a lot of patience and perseverance. You will many a times end up with results which you are not happy with, or you end up with a dead end, or you end up with someone else publishing what you were already working on. Always have an inquisitive and inquiring mind. Keep asking questions. Never stop asking questions. Don't be afraid to appear dumb. That's one fear which many of us always have, that, oh, will I sound stupid? Don't worry about it. No one's thinking as much about it as you are. The ability to always be a student. If you're planning to pursue a career as a researcher, you have to remember that you will have to keep learning, upskilling. Things keep changing over time, and you have to be able to learn new things which change your field. The ability to adapt to different changing situations and think, on your feet, and the fact that you are never too old to learn anything. Okay, so Python, etc., didn't even exist when we were in college. When we were in college, I think R was just getting introduced as a software and things like that, right? So you have to learn. You can't say that, oh, I'm not going to learn because I'm not good with it. You get good at anything only if you practice something. Always be aware of what you don't know. Always make sure that your paper always highlights some limitations. That's one thing which I forgot to mention in the conclusion. Always mention that you have not accounted for 1, 2, 3, whatever it may be. It's always a strength to know what your paper has not covered or not addressed, or what it has not answered. Okay, and I'm going to leave you with those 2 quotes. Okay, right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for guiding us through the process. It was really enlightening. So now we'll have a very brief Q&A session. So I request the participants to put in the questions in the chat box, and we'll be taking them up soon. So the first question that we have is, what are the avenues to publish research papers? Because most of us students write research papers, but we do not know how and where to publish those.
Okay. Do you want me to take the questions first and then answer, or one question at a time?
One question at a time, ma'am.
Okay, fine. Right. So basically, with respect to publishing research, actually, I should have begun by saying this. In your undergrad, at least for the first 2 years, make sure you're learning as much as is possible. Okay. And this is what we tell even our students here, because we also have an undergrad program in economics. Learn as much as you can. Companies or NGOs, etc. So when you're looking for internship options, etc., people are not going to hire you because the skill set is not as advanced as what they may need. So again, coming back to the research point, where can I publish? If you're writing with initial years, you will be writing with a faculty. Okay, at least to start with, because to understand the ropes of research, at least you should be working as in, this is my opinion. You could have different, you could have someone else who could say something totally different or opposite to this. But I would recommend working with a senior or any faculty member, because they already understand what publishing a paper means, and how it needs to be proofread a gazillion times. So one editor of a really senior journal was having a session on what should a person who's writing, the same question that you asked me, what are the avenues and how should we publish. The one thing which he could not stop talking about was proofread your paper a million times, and even that's going to be less. So the thing is, one, read in that field so that you've not left out parts, and then look for what you call journals which are from that field, for them to be able to what you call accept that paper. Ideally, if you've written it, co-authored it with a faculty member, it helps because they have an understanding, a very clear understanding of what a research paper is supposed to be, and therefore it would help if you are at least guided by them for your first paper to start with. Maybe that would then help, okay, in finding out journals which are from that area, which are good, because see, these days there are a lot of fake journals as well, journals which are so-called open access journals. You'll keep getting bombarded by some of them saying that please publish with us. Don't do that. Look for actual good established journals which in your field, because, and it's always okay if you get rejected by a few initially, because if they're a really good journal, they will always give you a reason for why they rejected it, and that reason will only help you strengthen the paper further, okay, whatever drawbacks it may have. So in that case, look for papers. See, many a times, one place where you can start looking for journals is if you look at the papers which you read to produce your paper, you would find the journals which have published similar studies. Look at those journals, look at their requirements, look at what they're publishing, and then go ahead. But yes, I would still think that yes, talk to a faculty member before you, at least for the first paper that you plan to write. Okay, right.
Thank you, ma'am. So the next one is asked by Harshada. So she has asked, how does one set parameters in a qualitative study? For example, the research paper studies selected states and not the country as a whole. So how can such parameters be applied on a qualitative research?
Ma'am, I'm so sorry.
Yes,
sorry
yes,
to disturb you. That was asked by Ameya Kulkarni. Like
that's
all
okay,
the people are messaging me on my private message, and then I'm forwarding it.
That's okay. Guys, please don't bombard Harshada. Okay, so yeah, so the thing is that for a qualitative study, it depends on, again, what question you are asking. The parameters depend on the question that you have asked. Was he able to come up with a question which required a qualitative analysis? Or because then I can probably think about the parameters. Harshada, you could ask him that and then get back to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes,
so
ma'am. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. So the next one is, what is the one thing you wish you would have known before writing your first research paper?
Okay. One thing I had known. So one thing I had known before it. Oh, yes, I remember. The one thing I wish I would have known is that journals take forever to review. Some journals take forever to review a paper. We finished writing the draft. We finished, proofreading everything. We sent it out to the journal in June, and we got the comments in the next year, May. Okay, so it was like a full year which had passed. And the one thing I wish I had known was that the data files that I'd worked on needed to be stored in a very structured manner, so that when you get the comments 1 year later, you don't have to go back and then try and figure out, okay, मैंने इस फाइल में ये सेव किया था, अब मुझे याद नहीं है कि इस फाइल में और इस फाइल में क्या फर्क है, etc. Okay, so one practice which I then started following was writing down, okay, for this file, this is the change which was made, and in terms of data, etc., in terms of modeling. So in terms of structuring, I think I wish I would have known that initially to start off with. But other than that, I think I was quite happy to sort of just take it up as a new learning experience, because I was not working in that field. I just started my PhD, and that was not my field at all. But I ended up working on it, and it ended up becoming a paper. So I'm thankful to Professor Vijayalakshmi also for that. But yeah.
Yeah, ma'am. So we'll have the last question. So one is, could you please suggest or recommend trade journals, magazines, or professional organizations that we can follow on social media so that we get an orientation towards writing research papers or towards research as a field?
Sure. So the most extensive research which is carried out, I think you would have most of your multilaterals, right? So you would have your IMF for the monetary part, you would have your World Bank for the development economics, you'd have ILO for labor, etc. You'd have BIS, Bank for International Settlements for central banking. You would have, so these are all the multilaterals. Other places which are really good organizations to possibly follow, which work across fields, would be Brookings. You have Brookings, which works across what you call different sectors. And what else? You also have, which ones am I missing? You have the Reserve Bank. Reserve Bank obviously has quite good working papers. You have, um, let me think. You've asked for international ones in terms of, or in general, right?
In general, yes, ma'am.
Okay, yeah. So then you also have some of the other ones in terms of, you do have, I think, yes, you have OECD. They come out with some of the what you call studies in terms of most of these would be cross country. You also have so OECD, WTO. You have for the trade part. I think someone asked about trade journals. So check out WTO to start with as a multilateral, and then you can go from there. So these are like huge institutions. So it's always, if you go to the umbrella of it essentially, and then you go into lower sort of categories and then explore some of the journals that they. So ideally, if you just want to know the top 10 whatever journals, you go to the AEA, American Economic Association website, and you'll have all the rankings there. But typically, that's not all black and white also, right? So you don't have all the categories of economics which what you call get classified in the top 10 or whatever. So in that sense, it wouldn't be the only, you can look at them. You have most of the major journals which exist over there. You have, which other places? You also want some journal names, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Journal names. Okay, so again, I'm going to have to refer you to that particular website, because I know different people may have different interests. Start with the website of the American Economic Association, and go from there in terms of how you want to go ahead. That should be fine in my opinion. And then what else you would have? So ideally, you would have your Journal of Economic Perspectives, which is a very good journal, very high ranked journal, which deals with not just empirics. For human development issues, you have the Human Development Journal. You have the for energy, like I've already mentioned in Science Direct. You have I think it's called Energy Policy. That's a leading journal for those of you who may want to work in that. Then there's, so most of these places would have these. You have ADB, again, another multilateral which would publish studies. So that's there, but you also should follow some of the leading economists in terms of what they write, how they write the papers. And you can start from home in terms of, at least I like reading his work in terms of Raghuram Rajan and Viralacharya and all those people as well, because they have very clear, the clarity of thought is very evident in some of their work. So you read it and you instantly know what they're talking about. Okay, so it's that clear in terms of what they're trying to convey. So yeah, read some of these works, and then maybe again, depending on what you're interested in, doesn't have to be that okay ma'am ne bola hai to padna hai. So it's one of those things. Okay, right.
Thank you
I
so
hope I
much.
didn't end up boring everyone just because it was a monologue. I'm just looking at a screen. So
No, ma'am, it was good. It was really good. So over to Namita. She'll be giving the vote of thanks.
yeah, okay. Thank you.
I am immensely thankful to Dr. Aditi Chaubal ma'am for sparing us some time from her busy schedule to give us some useful insight into research writing. We express our heartfelt gratitude on behalf of the economics department as well as the student-led body EcoCircle. Ma'am's ideas and elegance of explanation of the topic deserves to mention my deepest sense of appreciation. An event like this cannot happen overnight. The wheel starts rolling weeks ago. We have been fortunate enough to be backed by our EcoCircle team who has pulled off the research writing workshop very well. Last but not the least, I would like to thank each and everyone who has attended the workshop to make it a huge success. EcoCircle is on Instagram and Facebook. We also have a blog, Econ Declassified. The link is in the chat box. Follow us for more updates on activities that we conduct. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Namita. Harshada, were you able to get an answer from Ameya?
Yes, ma'am. He has just messaged me. Let me read it. Due to some internet issues, he could not hear the question properly,
Okay.
but he's saying that he
Right.
got the answer.
Oh,
Ma'am,
okay, fine.
my primary question was that in the case of, in your research paper, you chose the states arbitrarily where you were conducting your research. But in the case of a
No.
qualitative research paper, how would you set your parameters and limits, right, is my main question. Because in the
No,
case of
okay. So
quantitative data, you can select the states you want to study. But how does that work in a qualitative scenario?
Right. So for one thing, nothing is arbitrary in research. It's never supposed to be arbitrary. But so to answer your question about states which we were looking at, we had a state-wise distribution of which states were using how much percentage, how many households were, or what percentage of households were using a particular fuel. And therefore, we were able to then, club all the ones which had a very high percentage of households using biomass fuels and club them together to get 97%. So that's how those states were chosen, and it was not arbitrary. To answer your question in terms of qualitative study, there are a few drawbacks if depending on the question. Now, if your question is supposed to, do you have a question in mind? Mia?
I'm sorry, there's some internet issues, but
Yeah, that's fine.
my question, the question that I'm currently, the question that I wrote of was the applications of a monocurrency system in a global economy. What if there is just one currency that is applied
Right.
on a global scale, and will those countries accept such a system? Is my
Right.
main
So,
question. Then how do I set
yeah. So,
parameters in such a case?
right. To answer your question, you would first start reading with John Galbraith's book on currency. The other thing is what you would end up is you would not end up with a qualitative study. Very frankly speaking, you would end up with a quantitative study. Uh, the second thing is that in that the parameters would depend on the different aspects that you would like to study. One, acceptance. Okay, for any currency, acceptance is key. So if today the entire world decides that the dollar will not be accepted in their countries, dollar is going to lose all its worth, right? Acceptance in terms of which currency should be accepted, so is key, right? So read some of the papers about currency, because right now the whole debate about the currency, so to speak, is with respect to digital currency. In fact, the BIS just published, I think 2 days back, an entire report on digital currencies. So you may want to take a look at that, and there you may or may not find some of the quantitative work which they have been doing in the background. But it is extremely important that you understand why it will need to be quantitative if you were to come up with some of those things. Yes, your theory would be entirely qualitative, obviously, because you would be, and that would draw heavily from the whole demand for currency, the supply of currency, and then the acceptance, as I said, of it, then the regulation of it. So there are different parameters in terms of what constitutes a currency and what constitutes its what you call free transaction value, so to speak. Right, the fact that it is acceptable, the fact that I can go to walk into any country, and if I give $1, they have to sort of, the exchange essentially has to take place. But why is that only with the dollar? Why can I not walk into any country with an Indian rupee and do the same thing? Right? So in order to answer that question, you need to go back to the foundations of currency itself, because what we currently trade in terms of currency, in terms of a medium of exchange, store of value, the functions of money essentially, is something which has been formulated as a theory ages ago. So start with the functions of money. What constitutes the functions of money? What constitutes universality of any one currency in terms of a medium of exchange? Okay, those are the questions. Once you start reading about them, those parameters in terms of what you are asking would become clearer. Is that clear? Yeah. I don't know whether he heard it. But
I think he's
yes, ma'am, I heard it. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
I was just writing whatever you were saying down.
Oh, right. Okay.
Thank you very
Fine.
much.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Right. So, Harshada,
Yes, ma'am.
Are we done?
Yes, ma'am. And I think if any of the students have any doubts, they can always email us and we will forward you the questions.
Sure, not a problem at all.
Yes.
Yeah. So is Aditi ma'am still around?
Yeah, ma'am. Aditi ma'am told me to convey to you that she is facing some internet issues.
Yeah,
so she couldn't join, but she will definitely get back to you since she has your number.
Sure. Yeah, I think she's messaged me. So I think that shouldn't be a problem. So, okay, there is this. Fine.
Yes,
right. So not a problem. I'll do that. Anything else? I'm sorry it took so long. That's the only thing. I tried to. I thought it wasn't going to go so long, but
it's completely all right. Ma'am, I think now we have begun with the process of writing the research papers for Arthniti as well as EcoSem, and even the blog has started working. So along the process, if we need any guidance, we will definitely get back.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes,
not a problem at all.
Thank you so much.
So
Thank you.
Are you guys also having an online semester?
Yeah, the entire semester. Yeah, we have our exams coming up now, next week.
Oh, okay.
We are already done with like first CIs. Now the second CIs are coming up.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. All the best.
Thank you.
Right. Okay then.
See you.
Can I sign off then?
Yes, ma'am. I'm ending the meeting.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Stay home. Stay safe.
Yeah. You too. Stay home. Stay safe. Bye.